What's up, everybody? Good morning to you. My name is Riley, and today we're going to be learning how to make API calls in Swift without using any dependencies like Alamofire, etc. So as you can see over here on the left, this is what we're going to be creating. All of these cells right here are actually responses from an API call that we're going to be doing, and I just printed it out on a very basic table view right here. And as you can see over here on the right, this is the tool that we're going to be using for the API calls. So instead of me creating my own backend with my own APIs that you can call, which would probably cost me some money, I'm just going to be using this free tool that these nice people have created that lets you test different API calls. So we'll be using them. Big thanks to them. So I'm going to throw up on the screen right now kind of like a table of contents for the video. Basically, we're going to be going over a lot of things. If you want to skip ahead because you maybe already know something, feel free to do so. I leave timestamps right there, so you're more than welcome to go ahead. What we're going to be going over is get and post calls for APIs in Swift. We're going to be going over how to receive and use a JSON object from those API calls. We're going to be going over how to set an authorization header for those API calls. And we're also going to learn how to set a timeout for the API calls. So, whole bunch that we're going over. Feel free to skip ahead. Otherwise, let's just jump into it. So this is the old project. So let's go over to File, New, and let's create a new project. And it's going to be a single view application, and I'm just going to close out of the project in the background really quickly. Okay, and let's just call it API Tutorial Video. And you can call it whatever you want, place it wherever you want. Let's just hit create. And alright, I'm going to very quickly clean some of this up because some people get confused, which is alright. Let's name this group etc. And I'm going to drag in the app delegate, the assets folder, and the launch screen because we don't need these for this video. And I'm going to drag this info.plist file above it. Okay, cool. So we have our main.storyboard and we have our view controller, and those are the only things we're going to be touching for right now. So go over to the view controller real quick, and let's just change this build target to be an iPhone 8. This just determines which simulator you use. I prefer the iPhone 8 over the 10R. Okay, let's get rid of this comment. And the first thing we're going to be doing is going over a get call. So I'm going to create a new function, and I'm just going to call it get call, and I'm going to call this in the view.load. If you don't know, the view.load just runs every time a page loads. Because this is the only page in the application, this will load every single time the application starts, which is exactly what we want. Okay, so this, as I said, is code for a get call. Awesome. Okay, so the first thing we need in any API call is definitely the URL. So let's do let URL equal. And we don't need just a string. Swift will require you to use something called the URL object, which you can get by typing URL, open parentheses, and let's scroll down until you see string. And basically this just provides you with a whole bunch of different options. We'll be using it for in a little bit. This string right here is going to be the actual URL that you want to use. And as we can see here, they have some example code for us. I'm just going to copy and paste this URL that they have here. And I'm going to place this right here. They're using the to-dos portion of their APIs. I'm going to be using something called posts. There's absolutely no real difference. It's just the difference in the data that it returns. It's totally up to you, whatever. And this is actually going to be an optional value. So when we're creating this URL object right here, the code doesn't know that this string that we're passing it is a valid URL, but we know it's a valid URL. So what we're going to do is we're going to place this exclamation mark here to tell the code that, hey, we know that this is a valid URL, and this URL object will be created 100%. Okay, so that's looking good. We have our URL object. Next, we're going to create something called a request object, or more specifically, a URL request. So let's do let request equal URL request, And let's do open parentheses. And you can see it's asking for the URL object that we just defined. So let's just type URL and we're good to go there. So now we have this request object. So basically any settings or any options that you want to configure for an API call is going to be done through this request object right here. And really the only thing that we're going to change for a GET call is the HTTP method. And the HTTP method is whether it's a GET call, a POST call, etc. So what we're going to do is we're going to do request.http method, and this is just going to be GET. If it was a POST, we would write POST instead of GET. And let's just change this to var so it doesn't plain. And there we go. So now that we have this done, we have one more object that we need to create, something called a URL session. So let's do let session equal URL session dot shared. And this session is basically how we're actually going to start the call. So the request holds all of our, like the different configurations that we can do, the different options. The URL is obviously just the URL. The session is how we're actually going to call it, and the session is also going to return some value to us. And we're going to call this by doing session.dataTask with URL request, as you can see right here. This URL request is what we just created, so let's just type request. And then we're going to do open curly braces, and it's going to return three things potentially to us. So let's do data, and I'll be going more over these in a little bit, response and error. And for one reason or another, whenever you have a session, you need to do a dot resume right here. Basically, whenever it calls this session, whenever it's done doing whatever it is doing, you just want to tell it to resume the rest of the code. So you write this here. It forces you to do that. So going back a little bit, as I said, the session will return three things potentially to you. The first is data. So this will be the actual JSON that's returned from the API call. So you can see for this example, it returned this JSON object. That will be stored in data. The response holds any information about the call. So if there was an error code that was received, you'll see it in the response. It'll tell you the amount of data that was returned in this data object, a bunch of other stuff that we'll be seeing here in a little bit. And then potentially, if there was an error, it will return the error within this object right here. So what we're going to do, just to start off, to keep things simple, is we're going to print out this response. As I said, this just holds a whole bunch of information about the call, and I think that's a good place to start. So any one of these three items can be nil. They're not guaranteed to have any value. So what we're going to do is we're going to do if response equals response, and then we're going to print it out here. So what this is doing is we're saying if a response is received, print it out. That's all this is doing. It's checking that the response exists. If it does, then we're going to print it out. Cannot, oops, sorry. If let response equal response. That should work now. So now what we're going to do is we're going to run this project and see what we get. Theoretically, it should print out this response right here, but we'll see. And as you can see down here, it looks like it did work. So this is the response, the start of it. We can see the URL that we called. We can see the status code, which is 200, which is exactly what we need. You can see all kinds of different things. This is what it returned. You can see it returned a JSON object of some sort. You can see the date. There's really just a whole bunch of other stuff that you can look at if you so desire. But for now, this is exactly what we needed. We can see that we did receive a response, and that's great. So I'm just going to comment this out because we really don't need it for right now. And let's continue on. So let's talk about the data a little bit. So the data is literally just data. Swift has absolutely no idea what form this data in. It doesn't know if it's a string, doesn't know if it's a JSON object. We have to specifically tell it what it's going to be. So what we're going to do, and just bear with me here, we're going to do a do block, and then we're going to do a catch just in case something doesn't work. And we're going to do if let data equal data. And this is very similar to here. Like we said, we don't know if the data exists. So the first thing we do is we check that to make sure the data exists. Let's do comma. And then let JSON equal JSON serialization dot, oops, wrong direction, dot, let's see here, JSON object with data. And then this is going to be the data that we have here, and options is going to be none. So what we did was we made sure the data existed, and then we checked that that data was a JSON object. We're basically saying we're going to try transferring this data into a JSON object, which should theoretically work. And I forgot to do a try here. So because this could potentially cause some errors, we're going to do a try right here, and it'll go down to this catch if it doesn't work. So hopefully that made sense. Let me write this out in the comments. So what we're doing is we're turning the data into a JSON object. Okay, so let's see how far we got here, and let's just print out that JSON object. And it's saying this is unreachable. I don't know here. We'll just comment that out for now. And then let's run. Okay. And as we can see here, it looks like we successfully printed out the JSON object that was returned to us, which is awesome. That's exactly what we want. So this is all the data that was returned by that API call. So now we actually need to go down and get specific pieces of information that we want. And what we're going to do is we just want the body right now. When I printed it out in the simulator earlier, that's all it was just the body on each row of that table view. So let's go here and let's do JSON dot for each. And that would be really great if it would follow up for me. Oh, I forgot one portion. So when we get that JSON object, Swift is a little difficult when it comes to JSON objects. As you can see here, there is a whole bunch of different sub objects, I guess you could say. Like this entire thing right here is an object, this entire thing right here is an object, and then within there you have separate fields. We have to specify that specifically to Swift. So for now, bear with me and just do as any right here, but this will be changing here in a little bit, actually potentially right now. But let's just do JSON dot for each, and then do curly braces on each side of those parentheses, and then just type element in. So what this code does right here is JSON dot for each, and then it grabs an element. It's going to basically do a for loop for every element within this JSON object. So it sees that there's an object here, an object here, an object here. It's just going to iterate through each object and allow us to grab different values. So this element is just this one specific object rather than the entire list that we had before. So now we should be able to do print element. Okay, and you can see here it's printed differently. So here we have one element that was printed out, we had another element that was printed out, and this is exactly what we need. So now we want to go even deeper. We want to grab just this one specific body of each element. So this is where we're going to have to revisit this right here. So what this said was we have a JSON object and it just has any form that it wants. Well, this isn't specifically true. What the actual form was string any. So we had, if you remember, we had the outside array, and within that array was a whole bunch of these objects. And then within each object is kind of like another array of all these fields. And then all these fields, it has a string right here, and then it has some value over here. So as you can see, this is some string, and then another string. This is some string, and then an integer. Some string, and then another string. That right there is this. This string is this. These field titles right here. And then this any is just saying that whatever value is over here, it can be any value that it wants to be. It can be a string, it can be an integer. As you can see, we need both, so that's why this is any. But this is a nested array. You can see it's too deep because we had the outside array, which is every JSON object, and then we had this array of objects. It's a little complicated, it's a little hard to understand, but eventually, hopefully, once you're doing this more often, it'll make more sense. But for now, just bear with me. So now we should be able to continue on, and let's remove this print statement. So we have the element, so this whole thing right here is element. And remember, we just want the body. So let's go if let body equals element, and then let's do the brackets, and inside here we're going to grab the body. So we have this object here, and we're saying we just want the body, and we have to define what type that's going to be, because you can see right here it says that it could be any, but we need to specifically define what it's going to be here, and we see that this is a string. So we're going to do a string. And hopefully this isn't too confusing. I know it still will be, but just rewind the video a couple times or try to look something up. You'll eventually get it. It's not too bad once you understand it, but at first I understand it can be a little difficult. So we're going to print the body here, and let's run it. Alright, and you can see now we have printed the bodies of each element. So this is what we needed right here. And for now, let's just finish out the job. Let's create an array at the top of our view controller. Let's do var bodies, not in a creepy way. This is going to be an array of strings, and it's just going to be empty for now. And then instead of printing this out, let's say that every time we get a new body, we just do bodies.append body. And this body is what we grabbed right here. So now we're storing our API request data into this array up here. And we have to do self dot because whenever you're running a request, this is asynchronous, so it runs in the background. So if you called this right now, and then there was code after here, some kind of code right here, it would run this code and this code simultaneously, instead of doing this code, then the next code. So we have to do self, that's a Swift thing. So, very good. Now we have finished our get call. So, hopefully that wasn't too bad. The good news is a post call is very similar, not too much worse. So, let's just copy and paste this. because it is very similar. There's really no point in redoing it. So this is going to be a code for a post call. And let's change this to post call. And we're going to change this to post call. So we're no longer going to call this get call function. Alright, so we're going to keep the URL the same. Where things get a little bit different is the HTTP method is no longer going to be get, it's going to be post. And with that we have to define a few more things. So the first is we're going to do request dot add value, and the value is going to be, oops, a little bit too many there. This is going to be application slash JSON. And then over here we're going to do content dash type. So basically what we're doing is we're saying we're going to add some kind of JSON object to this post call. So rather than just the API returning some JSON object to us, we're going to give the request some JSON object that we're about to define. Okay. So the next thing we're going to have to do is actually create that JSON object. So I'm going to do this at the very top. Doesn't really matter where you do it as long as it's above the request. And let's just do let JSON body equal, let's do brackets. And if you go over to the website, you can see what it's looking for. I might have to find it again. View detailed examples. Okay, right here. So this isn't Swift code, this is JavaScript, I believe, but you can see what it's looking for. So if you send it a title, a body, a user ID, it will return this from the API. So that's what we're going to do. So let's minimize this. We want a title, a body, and a user ID. So let's just do title, body, and a user ID. Okay, now let's talk about this some. So this isn't a JSON object by default. This is really more of just like an array. But we will be changing that here in a little bit down here. But this is what we're sending to the API. We're going to give it a JSON object containing these values here. And let's just put something in here. Let's do test title hi YouTube. The body is hello there. And the user ID, let's just make this 1. Now for JSON, you have to specify what this type is that we have right here. Going back to earlier, hopefully you remember, this is just a string any. So you can see we have our string, we have our colon, and then we have some value over here. This is a string, this is an int. So string, any, and that's what this is right here. Okay. So now we need to give this JSON object to the request and actually make it a JSON object rather than just this, I guess this is the dictionary. Okay, so let's go down here. And the first thing we're going to do is we're going to convert this into an actual JSON object. So let's do guard let JSON, or actually let's make it HTTP body equal, and we're going to do try JSON serialization dot data with JSON object, and that's going to be the JSON body from the top, and the options are just going to be nothing. And then we're going to have to do else, and let's just do return. Oops, messed that up. Okay. So this right here, we're turning this JSON body into a JSON object rather than just a dictionary. And it's no guarantee that that's going to work, which is why we wrap it in a guardlet. So if it doesn't work, we can just return out of the function rather than still trying to call the API even though it won't work. Okay? Continuing on. Now we need to attach this HTTP body to the request itself. So let's do request.http body equals HTTP body. Very simple. Okay? So now that that's done, let's just get rid of this old code from the last thing. And let's make this any, because currently we don't know what the JSON object that it returns is going to look like. So let's print out the JSON object. Okay, so all we did here was we added a JSON object, we changed some of these options for a post call, and then we just changed this because this is a different API call. It's not going to return the same thing, and we don't know what it's going to return. So let's just run this code and see what it does return. So it looks like it returned nil. So that's fun. Alright, so let's look a little bit more into this. Okay, after an embarrassing long time, I determined that the issue was just simply right here. I had to specify it's a string any rather than just any. That's an interesting problem. I feel like I have not run into that very often, but if you run it now, it should actually print out the result of that API. So you can see here it's an optional value, and the body is what we set there. The ID is 101, which we did not set. Titles test, user ID is 1. Okay, so now that we have that, we can actually start going further into this object. So we should be able to now do JSON, if let body, which actually, let's get the ID rather than the body. If let ID equals JSON ID as, and this is an int, then let's print out, print the ID. Value of optional type. It's very interesting. This shouldn't be optional, but whatever, we'll go with it. Let's do if let JSON equals JSON, and then let's wrap this in here, and now we should be good. Alright, and we can see we just printed out that ID. So that is excellent. That's exactly what we want. Let's just add that to our array up here, the bodies. So let's do self.bodies.append, and it's needing a string, whereas this is an integer. That's an easy problem to fix. We can just do some string interpolation is what it's called. So using this format where you write out the quotation marks and do a backslash with parentheses, you can turn an integer into a string value, or at least display it like it is. So now that that's done, we have our get call and we have our post call. And as you can see, we're adding both values to bodies. Obviously only one of these APIs is being called right now, but that's alright. Okay, so now what we can do is, let's just go over a couple other options that I think can be very helpful for you when setting up API calls in Swift, or really anywhere in general. So let's just go over to our post call. Actually, we'll use the get call because it has more data that it returns, it's more obvious. Just a couple of things that I think would be very helpful for you. One is an authorization header. So the API that we're using right now, this is for public use, so they have no authorization for it, and that's how they intend it to be. However, if you're working at a company and you have an API call or an API, it's almost always going to have some kind of authorization on it. So if you have authorization on an API and you need to add something for that, all you would do is request.add add value, and this is exactly what we did down here. And this value is going to be, so let's say you had some kind of authorization header and you had some kind of token required for that authorization header. You would just type in the authorization token here for value, and then for the HTTP header field, this is whatever that authorization header is called. So let's just call it auth header. So if for whatever API you're calling, it had some kind of auth header that required some token, you would just type in the token over here and the auth header over here. Now I can't tell you what these are going to be because it's going to be different for whatever API you're using, but this is the format that you'd follow. And then one other piece of information I think would be very helpful is a timeout. So if you have an API call that could potentially take a while and you don't want your users waiting for too long, you could do request dot timeout interval, and let's say you did 10, that will just be 10 seconds. So this API will run for 10 seconds before it just says sorry, nope, and times out if no response is given. So just some quick tidbits there for you. So the last thing we're going to do in this video is we're going to set up a very simple table view, and we're just going to print the results out there, just so, I mean, you have it in an array now. If you know table views, you should know everything, but just so you have the complete picture of how you can use APIs. So we're just setting some constraints here. So the table view will take up the entire length and width of this view. We're going to set the view controller as the data source and delegate. I'm assuming you already know how to use table views if you're watching this video. If you don't, I would recommend learning that. It's very important. I kind of cover it in some other videos, and hopefully I will in the future as well. UITableView data source. And then let's add those functions now. So it is a number of rows. And we're going to return the bodies.count. So we want however many, the number of rows we want is however many elements we have in this array here. So bodies.count. And then let's do cell for row at. Let's do let cell equal UI table view cell. This is a very, very, very simple table view. And then let's return that cell. And then let's do cell dot text label dot text equals bodies index path dot row. Now if we run this, nothing will happen right now, because even though these items are being added to the bodies array, and then we're saying for this table view we want the elements of the bodies array to dictate what shows on the table view, the issue is that these APIs are being called after this table view is being created. So as you can see, there's nothing here. So basically what we need to do is whenever we receive a result from these APIs calls, we need to refresh the table view because we've added new information to bodies. So we can do that very simply by going to the end of our response and just doing self, well, hold on, there's one more step I forgot to do. If you hold Option and click on main.storyboard, you can open this up in the assistant editor. And let's just do control drag, and I forgot to create an outlet for this table view. So let's just do table view. And let me rearrange this ever so slightly. Okay, so now we have an outlet. Now we can refresh the table view within our code. So let's go down here. What we could do is self.tableview.reload data, and this will work, as we can see here, once it's done loading. However, you're going to get this error, and it's also going to take way longer than it really should. Yep, there it is. So the reason is, going back to what I told you before, API calls are done asynchronously, which means, as I said before, if you have code after here, the code for the API call will run at the same time that this other code is being run, except the API call will be done in a different thread. And this gets a lot more complicated than I'm willing to explain right now, but basically you must force the reload data to happen within the same exact thread, or the main thread really. So let's do dispatch queue, dispatch queue.main.sync, and then let's paste that in here. And what this is doing is it's forcing whatever code's within this block to run on the main thread synchronously. Okay? And the reason we were getting an error before is it's dangerous to modify UI elements asynchronously, because you can edit the same element at the same time and it causes all kinds of corruption issues and more stuff I'm not going to get into. But as you can see, it was loaded quickly. We got rid of the issue just to show you once again how quick that was. We have it, it's building, it's pulled up, and it's already here. Okay? So there you go. That was API calls in Swift. It's a little complicated, definitely not something I'd recommend for a beginner, but definitely necessary if you're not going to use dependencies. And there you go. So I hope you learned something. If you did, leave a like. If you did not, leave a dislike and tell me down in the comments how I can improve for my next video. And if you have any ideas or anything you want to see, just leave me a comment and I can work on making a video for that. So there you go, guys. I will see you in the next one. Peace.